Figured I'd never see her again, my daughter-in-law said. I looked at my son, but he looked down and said nothing. I am 73 years old. I don't wear pearls or speak in riddles. I've never considered myself delicate, but I've always tried to be. Soft, present, but not imposing. Supportive, but never interfering. That's how I raised my son. That's how I treated his wife. For the last 2 decades, I've lived alone in a quiet house with white shutters and creaking floorboards. On weekends, I tend my camellias, deep pink, almost red. Their blooms come when everything else is asleep. I've always loved that about them. Quiet beauty, resilient, modest. That Sunday evening, the sky over Los Angeles was streaked in watercolor shades of orange and lavender. A warm breeze stirred the scent of nearby citrus trees. Cars rumbled gently down the street as the neighborhood settled into dinner and television hours. Wind chimes danced on a porch somewhere down the block. I had just finished tying the ribbon around the cake box, a simple lemon bundt cake, my usual, and changed into my navy blue dress with tiny white dots. It still fit. I had ironed it that morning. With pearl-button sleeves and a modest neckline, it reminded me of the years I used to go to church, when I still believed in forgiveness as something you offered freely, not something you earned. The cake was warm, carefully wrapped, and resting in both hands as I walked to my car. I never parked in their driveway. I never liked to intrude. Their home, modern, beige stucco with sharp white trim, stood at the end of the block. A sleek car gleamed in the driveway. As I stepped through the open door, the scent of clove-scented candles and roasted garlic drifted into my nose. Their Labrador, Molly, trotted up, tail wagging. I bent down to pet her. She was always kind. But inside, something was different. The air felt too still. My daughter-in-law sat on the edge of the sofa, one leg crossed over the other, her phone in hand. Her dark hair was pulled into a neat bun. She barely looked up as I entered. No smile. No greeting. And then, without warning, like a blade slipped between ribs, she spoke. Figured I'd never see her again. This is my house, and I don't want her here, it was said casually, almost politely, as though she were noting the weather. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. The words hung in the room like smoke. I stood frozen by the entryway, still holding the cake. My fingers gripped the box a little tighter. I turned to my son, who was unwrapping plastic off a prepackaged salad mix at the kitchen island. He didn't look up. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his neck stiff. The clatter of Toms on a glass bowl was the only sound. The same hands I once kissed clean after messy art projects were now busy, avoiding me. I stared at him, silently asking for anything, a word, a glance, even a sigh of protest. Something that would tell me he remembered who I was. He remembered, but he was always afraid that everyone would think that he had everything thanks to his mother, and as he once said, I don't want to be nobody. So he kept silent, because he knew exactly where his wife worked. And more importantly, he knew exactly who the owner was. My chest tightened, but not from shock. I think, somewhere deep down, I had always sensed this moment coming. When my son married her, I told myself to give her space, to be patient, to let her shape her household without interference. I never criticized, never arrived uninvited. I never so much as suggested a change in paint color or parenting tip, though every instinct in me wanted to help. I thought that by staying silent, I was being kind. I thought silence was a form of love. I stood there for what felt like an entire minute. The ticking wall clock counted each second like a drumbeat in my ribs. The walls were decorated with minimalist art, abstract shapes in neutral tones. Their wedding photo hung above the fireplace. I had paid for the photographer, the venue, the flowers, all of it. I had even written the check for the down payment on this very house. And yet now I was being told I didn't belong here. With a slow breath, I crossed the room and set the cake down on the dining table. The table was already set, white ceramic plates, linen napkins, silver cutlery aligned like soldiers. A bowl of roasted vegetables sat steaming beside an untouched wine bottle. Still, no one moved. I turned back, reached for my purse and coat. My son still hadn't looked at me. "Where are you going?" he asked, not with concern, more like confusion, as if he'd expected me to stay and absorb the insult like I always had. My voice, when I found it, came out soft but sharp. "I don't want to cause discomfort," I said, adjusting my coat. "I respect your rules. It's your house, after all." She smirked slightly. Or maybe that was just my imagination. Either way, I didn't look long. I walked to the door, each step echoing in the silence. Molly whined quietly. I gave her one last pat before stepping into the dusk. Outside, the sky had shifted to deep violet. A street lamp flickered to life. The air had cooled, carrying the scent of someone's backyard barbecue. Sprinklers hissed nearby, casting mist onto manicured lawns. As I walked back to my car, the sound of my heels on the pavement felt strangely loud. The cake, forgotten, sat behind me on their table like a leftover offering. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached into my purse for the keys. Not from weakness. Not from cold. From something deeper. A kind of quiet rage that settles deep in your spine. Not the kind that explodes. The kind that waits. At home, I didn't turn on the lights. I left my coat on. The house was still, dimly lit by the last glow of day. I poured myself a glass of water, sat at the kitchen table, and stared into the dark. Outside the window, the camellias moved gently in the wind. I thought of my son's 5th birthday, of how he used to ask me to read the same book 3 times in a row, and I always did. Of the time he scraped his knee on the sidewalk and cried into my apron. I thought of all the Sunday dinners I had attended, even when I didn't feel well. Of every gift I had bought her with care. Every moment I had made myself small so she could feel big. And now she had erased me in a single sentence. But here's the thing about silence. It can be mistaken for weakness. And that's always a mistake. That night, something shifted. I no longer felt like a guest in my own family. I felt like someone who had given too much, for too long, to people who had mistaken grace for submission. So I sat there, in the quiet, and I began to think. Not about what I had lost, but about what they were about to. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. I lay in bed, motionless beneath the thin floral blanket I had used for over 20 years. The familiar scent of lavender from my linen spray lingered faintly in the air, mixing with the cooler breeze slipping through the barely cracked window. Outside, the wind rustled gently through the backyard camellias, and a distant dog barked once, then fell silent. Inside, the steady hum of the refrigerator and the soft tick of the wall clock kept time with my thoughts. I kept hearing her voice. Figured I'd never see her again. The words echoed, each repetition like a small thorn pressing deeper into skin. I remembered exactly how she said it flat, clear, without even a blink. She sat upright on the edge of the couch, her back perfectly straight, her tone casual. No anger and no heat. That's what made it worse. It didn't come from passion, it came from certainty. She wasn't afraid of consequence. And he believed that I would remain silent. My hands, resting on my chest beneath the blanket, curled slightly into fists. I could feel the old bones in my knuckles tense, my breath shallow with a kind of quiet rage that wasn't loud, but deep. It sat just under my ribs. It wasn't just her sentence that haunted me. It was everything behind it. The little comments, the sharp smiles, the slow erosion of my place in their lives. I remembered how she corrected me at the dinner table last summer. I had told a story about my late husband and I driving through Oregon, how we'd once gotten lost and found a beautiful cliffside inn by accident. She had smiled, tight and smug, then said, "Actually, the coastal highway is way more scenic. You'd only know that if you've driven it." She knew I had. But she dismissed me like I was a child telling a fairy tale. I brushed it off then, like I always did. I laughed, nodded, changed the subject. Then there were the comments about their house. She loved to emphasize how modern everything was, how things were more efficient now. She once said, while setting the table, "It's nice that you come from a time when everything was slower." I guess people had more patience back then, like I was a leftover from another era. Every visit, I noticed something. The way she handed me the cheapest wine glass. The way she paused when I offered help as if weighing whether I would be more trouble than assistance. Once, I baked a pie and brought it over, still warm, wrapped in foil. She took it with a smile and placed it on the side counter. It stayed there all night. No one touched it. After dinner, I saw it sitting exactly where I'd left it. She had thanked me, of course. Said it was thoughtful. But it was the kind of thank you give to someone handing you a flyer on the street. Polite. Disposable. There were other things. Messages. Smiles. Phrases so neatly wrapped in civility that it took hours to realize they were insults. Once, after I babysat their kids for the entire afternoon while they went to a spa, she sent me a message. Thanks again. Hope it wasn't too much for you at my age. I had spent the whole day preparing snacks, playing games, cleaning up toys, and making sure their youngest didn't cry once. I had even tucked them in for naps. At my age. Another time, she showed me a photo of their guest room. It was pristine, decorated in soft beige and green, with polished floors and new bedding. She handed me her phone and said with a smirk, just in case someone ever visits, I wasn't someone. I remembered a birthday party I wasn't invited to. A child's birthday. I had seen photos later on social media balloons, cupcakes, party hats, smiling faces. My grandson had been wearing a paper crown. I wasn't even told the date. And then there was the Thanksgiving. I had arrived with a dish in my hands, dressed in my nicest sweater, hair freshly brushed, earrings on. When I entered, there was no place set for me at the table. She looked surprised, then smiled and said, "Oh, we thought you weren't coming." No apology, no rush to grab a chair. Just that thin smile. I ate off a side table in the kitchen, alone, and through it all, through every cold glance, every dismissive comment, every carefully staged distance, my son stayed silent. That, more than anything, was the thing that dug deepest. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't present. He didn't defend me, didn't correct her, didn't say, "Mom should sit here," didn't ask why I hadn't been invited. He had stopped choosing me. I began to wonder, had I ever truly been chosen? Or had I just filled in the space when no one else did? Lying in bed, the hours passing in slow motion, I felt the weight of every small humiliation settle over me like dust. I felt it in my chest, heavy and still. I had given them time, money, kindness, silence. I had babysat, baked, supported, and kept my opinions to myself. I had been patient. I had made room. But now there was no room left for me. She thought she had one. She thought that sentence dash figured I'd never see her again was a final door slamming shut. But what she didn't realize was that I had been standing outside that door for a long time already. She didn't know what I had held back. She didn't know what I owned. She didn't know the real reason my son had a house like that, or why she had that job she spoke so proudly of. She had looked me in the eye and dismissed me. But that night, lying in the still dark of my small home, with the camellias brushing softly outside and the clock ticking like a distant drumbeat, I began to feel something shift. Not revenge. Not anger. Something quieter. Something solid. Resolve. For years, I had played the role they assigned me. The quiet elder. The afterthought. The polite visitor. Now, I was done playing. She had pushed me out. But she hadn't realized she had also pushed me toward something. She had no idea what came next. And neither did he. It wasn't revenge. Not exactly. It was something quieter. Sharper. Like the sound of a door finally locking behind you after years of leaving it open for people who never knocked. That Monday morning, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair with slow, deliberate strokes. The bristles tugged gently through the thinning strands now streaked with silver. I hadn't taken as much time getting ready in years. Not since the company's last annual board meeting, before I let others think I had stepped back. The room was softly lit with the pale gray glow of morning filtering through the curtains. The air was cool, smelling faintly of lavender from the drawer sachets I'd tucked into the dresser over a decade ago. A steady breeze moved through the open window, carrying the sound of distant traffic and birdsong. I reached for the navy blue dress again, the same one I wore to dinner, but this time it felt different. Not a shield, not a compromise. It was a uniform. It reminded me of the early years, the hustle, the determination. It had seen my strength once. Today, it would again. By the time I left the house, clouds were gathering in layers. A thin drizzle coated the sidewalk, making the pavement shimmer under the dull light. My leather shoes made a soft tapping sound as I walked, the rhythm steady and unhurried. I passed by the neighbors' hedges, freshly trimmed, the scent of damp earth rising with each gust of wind. The city felt distant, as if wrapped in wool. Blurred outlines of buildings stood tall behind veils of mist, and the occasional car sent ripples through puddles as it passed. I didn't rush. I wanted every step to matter. When I reached the office building all glass and steel, standing firm against the dreary sky, the doors slid open with a low hiss. My reflection stared back at me from the polished surface. Smaller than I remembered, but upright, composed. The security guard stood up from behind the front desk, his tie slightly askew. "Good morning, ma'am," he greeted, straightening instinctively. I gave a short nod. "Good morning." The lobby smelled of floor cleaner and brewed coffee. The soft hum of fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, accompanied by the occasional ding of elevator doors opening and closing. A woman in a pale coat stepped aside politely to let me pass. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the top floor. The walls of the elevator were brushed steel, cold to the touch. As I ascended, my heart beat evenly, a quiet rhythm of control. When the doors opened, the front desk secretary on the executive floor rose immediately. She'd only seen me twice before, but she remembered. "Good morning, ma'am." "Good morning," I replied, walking past her. My heels clicked softly against the marble flooring. In the open space beyond, seated by the glass wall in a cream blazer and heels, was my daughter-in-law. Her dark hair was pulled back, and her posture was relaxed, one leg crossed over the other, coffee in hand. She was smiling at something on her phone, the kind of smile reserved for jokes that flatter. Then she saw me. Her expression didn't change all at once. Just a flicker of confusion, a slight narrowing of her eyes. Her body straightened an inch, and the cup hovered midair, held tightly. I didn't slow. I walked past her without a word and opened the door to the CEO's office. The CEO stood up from his desk and came up to greet me. After a few general phrases, he asked the purpose of my visit. "Please ask Mrs. Alvarez to come in." Moments later, the door opened. My daughter-in-law stepped inside. Her hand lingered on the door handle longer than necessary. "You asked to see me," she said. Her voice was neutral, but her eyes flicked around the room. She hadn't been in here before. He pointed to a chair opposite me. "Please sit down. Our owner would like to talk to you." She Saturday slowly, crossed and uncrossed her legs, straightened the collar of her blazer. Her coffee cup was gone. I let the silence stretch. "You work in my company," I said at last. My tone was calm, not raised but final. "I sign the checks. I review the reports. I built this. From nothing." She blinked. Her hands gripped each other in her lap. "Yes," I said, leaning slightly forward, "I am your boss." I watched as the words landed. She inhaled shallowly. Her lips parted as if to respond, but no sound came out. I remembered her tone at dinner. Flat, dismissive. The certainty in her words. Figured I'd never see her again. I remembered how my son had looked at the floor. And now she sat in front of me, eyes wide, body tense. "I came to your home. I brought a cake. I wore my best dress. I was told to leave." She opened her mouth again, this time whispering. I didn't mean dash. I raised a hand, gently but firmly. "Please." "You did. You meant it. You always do." Her face flushed. I could see her trying to gather thoughts, but they scattered before forming. The office was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. A rhythmic, gentle noise that filled the silence between us. I stood. The floor was cold beneath my shoes. "You didn't know because I never needed you to." I stayed quiet. "I gave you space. I never asked for thanks. But you mistook that for absence." Her eyes searched mine. I saw something flicker, not guilt. Worry. "This reminded me of the day my father told me I would never make anything of myself," I said. "I was 17. I worked 3 jobs after that. One of them was cleaning offices, not much different from this one. I built this company one contract at a time. I gave my son everything. I looked her dead in the eyes. And I paid for your wedding. She didn't speak. I could have raised my voice at dinner. I could have made a scene, but I didn't. I kept my silence. For my son, I walked back around the desk, letting my fingers trail briefly along the smooth wood. But now I'm done being silent. She stood too, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her voice, when it came, was small. What do you want me to do? Nothing. Just understand. The comfort you live in was not built by luck. She turned toward the door. One more thing, I said. She paused. You may run meetings. You may wear the title. But don't forget who built the ground you stand on. She nodded once. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the door. Then she was gone. I stood by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. The city below moved on unaware. But I was no longer part of the background. I had stepped back into the light. And I wasn't going anywhere. The silence afterward was louder than anything she had said to me. But her? My daughter-in-law, the woman who once declared I would never return to her house, avoided me now. She didn't speak to me directly, not in passing, not in meetings. If our paths crossed, her voice would drop a tone and her stride would quicken. I caught her once, whispering in the break room, her back to the door. When she turned and saw me, her face froze for a moment. She covered it with a quick smile that didn't reach her eyes. I didn't confront her. I didn't need to. Let her sit in it. Let her live inside the reality she built, now that the walls had names on them and mine was the one at the top. On Friday, just as the sky began turning the dull color of early dusk, my phone rang. My son's name flashed across the screen. I hadn't heard his voice in 2 weeks. He sounded tired. You really embarrassed her, he said, skipping a greeting. I held the phone to my ear. The living room was quiet, except for the soft rustle of the wind outside and the faint ticking of the antique clock I hadn't wound in years. She said you humiliated her. That she didn't know, I let a pause pass. She told me to never come back, I said calmly. That was her message. This one was mine. There was a long stretch of silence. You're tearing the family apart. The words didn't sting. They landed flat. Familiar. She tore it apart when she made me feel like a stranger in your home, I said. I just stopped pretending it was still whole. His breath caught, just slightly. Mom, I didn't wait for what came next. You didn't stop her. He didn't argue. Then the line went dead. I placed the phone gently on the end table, beside a half-drunk cup of tea. The lamp beside me cast a soft golden glow, illuminating the edges of the room. I stared at the photo across from me, my son at 12, holding up a science fair trophy, theming. That weekend, I spent the day in the garden. The camellias were blooming deep red, pink, and soft white. Their petals opened bravely, even against the cooling weather. The soil was damp from recent rain, and the air held that clean, crisp scent that always comes after a storm. Birds chirped cautiously from nearby fences, and the wind moved gently through the trees, brushing against my cheeks like a whisper. I trimmed the edges, removed the weeds. My knees ached, but my heart was calm. For once, I didn't feel like I was waiting. That Sunday, they came. My son and his wife. Unannounced. It was late afternoon. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows through the living room windows. Dust particles floated in the golden light, swirling gently. I heard the car before I saw it. Tires crunching softly against the gravel. Then the knock at the door. She wore sunglasses, though the sun had already fallen behind the trees. He stood just behind her, arms crossed, shoulders tight. I opened the door without a word and stepped aside. The house smelled faintly of lavender and warm wood. They sat on the couch like guests in a stranger's home. The cushions didn't remember them. She took off her sunglasses slowly, folding them and placing them carefully on her lap. We didn't come to fight, my son said. I nodded. I didn't smile. I sat in the armchair across from them. The same one my husband used to sit in while reading the Sunday paper. She cleared her throat, her voice too careful. I didn't know who you were to the company. I looked at her. But you knew who I was to the family. Her mouth tightened. I thought you were trying to control things. A coldness crept into my chest. Not anger. Not surprise. Something slower. Control? I gave you space. I stayed quiet. I let you speak over me. I watched you erase me in front of people who barely knew my name. I never corrected you. Not once. She dropped her eyes. I let out a soft breath. You took my silence for weakness and took advantage of it. There's nothing I can do about it. My son's gaze moved between us. He shifted in his seat, looked at the floor, then back up. We want to fix this, he said. But you have to stop making things difficult. I almost smiled, but not from amusement. I paid for your house. I paid for your wedding. I started the business you both live from. I smiled through every insult. I watched your children when you wanted freedom. And I was the one asked to leave the table. They didn't answer. You want me to stop being difficult? Then stop pretending I imagined everything. Her cheeks reddened. She blinked quickly once. You were cruel, she whispered. I leaned forward slightly, my voice steady. Cruel would have been firing you. Cruel would have been telling the board exactly how little you respect your position. I didn't. I gave you the dignity you never gave me. The room was silent. Even the wind outside had stilled. I stood up slowly. The room felt taller. You can go now. They hesitated. She reached for her sunglasses. He looked around the room, his old home, though it never really had been. His eyes landed on the photo of him as a child. He looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. They walked to the door. I opened it for them. The air outside had cooled even more. Long shadows stretched across the sidewalk. They stepped out. Good night, I said, and closed the door. The click of the lock echoed softly. I returned to the chair, sat back, and leaned my head against the cushion. I could hear the gentle creak of the old house settling, the faint sound of a neighbor's television through the open window. I didn't cry. I just sat. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to explain myself. I had been heard, and I didn't regret a word. It started with a message. Not from my son. Not from her. From someone I didn't expect at all. One of the younger women from the office her name was Elise sent me a short email the Monday after that uncomfortable Sunday visit. I just wanted to say thank you, it read. I didn't know it was you behind the company. I watched how calm you were. I've never seen anyone carry themselves like that. I hope one day I have that kind of grace. That was all. Just a few lines. But something about it stayed with me. I sat by the kitchen window, the email still open, the morning sun slanting in golden lines across the counter. Outside, the street was quiet. The neighborhood still had that sleepy feel of early morning, a dog barking once, a trash bin being wheeled to the curb, the scent of wet grass lingering from the night's watering. I reread the message. She had no idea what I had been through. No idea how hard I had worked to stay composed in front of people who thought I was nothing. She just saw strength. Not silence. Not sacrifice. Strength. That same day, my phone lit up again. My son. A text this time. We'd like to talk again. I didn't reply. An hour later, please don't shut us out. She's sorry. I stared at the screen, waiting to feel something. Anger. Hope. Sadness. But all I felt was tired. That evening, the phone rang again. And again. I didn't pick up. The next day, there were flowers left on my porch. The card read, "We miss you. I placed them in water." They were beautiful. But beauty doesn't erase history. The third day, there was a knock at the door. This time it was her. Alone. She wore jeans and a sweater. Her hair wasn't pulled back. No makeup. She looked younger. Smaller. I opened the door. Didn't invite her in. Just waited. I don't know what else to say, she said quietly. I nodded once. Then maybe it's time to stop saying things. She looked down at the porch, at the crack in the concrete near the welcome mat. You were right about everything, she murmured. That surprised me. But not enough. I know, I said. I didn't mean to push you away. I just thought you were judging me. I felt small around you. I studied her face. The vulnerability looked real. But so had the confidence when she dismissed me. Feeling small is not an excuse to make someone else disappear, she nodded. Her eyes glistened. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know. I respect you now, not before. Not when I paid for her wedding. Not when I babysat her children. Not when I brought home-cooked food to her table. No, I didn't answer. I didn't need to. After a moment, she turned and walked away. No drama, no parting words, just quiet footsteps down the front path. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I went through my closet and took out a box of old letters. Inside were thank you notes from past employees, old friends, neighbors who had moved away. I read through them slowly. I needed the reminder that I had mattered to people, that I had done things right. I walked into the office 2 days later, not to confront, not to check up, just to sit in the space I had built, to feel the weight of everything I had carried. People greeted me kindly. A few smiled like they knew something now they hadn't before. Elise saw me and waved from across the floor. A small gesture, but full of meaning. I sat in my office, overlooking the city. The sky was clear. Soft blue with streaks of white clouds stretching far into the distance. I let the silence settle. No calls, no expectations, just air and time. Then I turned off the office light and closed the door behind me. No goodbyes, no performance. I was done explaining who I was. That evening, back home, I made tea. I sat on the porch. The camellias were still blooming. The wind was cool on my face. I could hear children laughing in the distance, birds in the trees. The world kept turning. But something had shifted in me. Not anger, not even sadness. Something lighter. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of being alone. Not of being misunderstood. Not of losing what was never mine to begin with. I realized age is not about weakness. It's about dignity. And if you've ever felt like you don't belong, you're not alone. I won't be afraid to tell the truth anymore, even if it hurts.